on Misunderstanding of the Big Book is presented by the CA-HOLLAND 2017 Convention Committee. The views and opinions expressed on this workshop are of the workshop facilitator and those participation in this discussion. They do not necessarily reflect the policies or position of CA-HOLLAND or Cocaine Anonymous World Service. Please join me in welcoming Paul C. Sorry, it's Danny from the USA. Wow.
Okay. I'm Danny. I'm a cocaine addict. I thought you were going to do the workshop for me, Paul. If I didn't get that last plane, you probably could have done everything for me, including my talk. All right. So I think you already said it. I don't speak for Cocaine Anonymous. I don't speak for anybody but myself. So what I want to talk about this morning is the mistakes that we make. It's so many people come into recovery today, and what happens is it goes something like this. Somebody comes into the rooms and they're dying, and they hear somebody say something interesting or cool, and could you sponsor me? And the person says, sure. Are you powerless over alcohol and drugs? And the newcomer says, yeah. They say, okay, is your life unmanageable? Yeah. Okay, do you believe in God? I'm not sure. Are you willing to believe in God? Yeah, okay, let's do a fourth step. And so it's our responsibility to take people through the steps as it's written in the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. So I want to talk about some of the mistakes that we make. The first thing, even before we get into the book, I try to cover a few issues. Like, I have the pleasure of doing this stuff a lot for many, many years, and I go all over the place, and people will come up to me and say, oh, I like what you shared. I appreciate it. I want what you got. And I go, my normal joke to that is, you don't know what I have. I might have a rash. How do you know what I have? And they go, well, you know what I mean, Dan. No, tell me. I want this. I said, what is this? And I want it. What is it? And they go, sobriety. Oh, you want sobriety? I go, okay, what is sobriety? And they go, I don't know. and they're so sure they want something that they don't know what it is. And so I asked them to define what sobriety is for them. Just a little simple exercise. What is sobriety for you? Because if you really want this, then you should know what this is. And so my definition of sobriety, you can steal it or you can make up your own, it don't matter. But my definition is sobriety is an alcohol and drug-free state of being characterized by freedom and happiness. I know what that makes sense to me. So once I understand what my goal is, now I can take steps towards, because people like us, we mix up two words we very often mix up: action and activity. And I'll give you a good definition. Action is a continuous, purposeful movement always toward a goal. A continuous, purposeful movement always toward a goal. That's what action is. Activity is not. Activity is not that. So at any time, since I have a goal, at any time I could stop and ask myself what I'm thinking or what I'm doing, is this a continuous, purposeful action towards my goal? And if the answer is no, then once again, I'm engaged in frantic activity. I'm the hamster on the wheel thinking I'm going somewhere, So once I have a definition of what my goal is, I can now stop myself when I'm not going there, when I'm not taking that direction. So that's kind of the first thing. So I want to talk about some misnomers that the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, even though we're Cocaine Anonymous, this is the only thing that separates us from any other organization in the world. Of course, besides AA, what separates Cocaine Anonymous and Alcoholics Anonymous from every other organization in the world is the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. Otherwise, we're just another Lonely Hearts Club band, really. So this is what separates us. This is our directions on how to take a broken man and broken woman and put them back together again. So people will say that, how many people have their book with them today? Okay, so the rest of you people used to go to the crack house without a pipe, right? You come to a big book study without a big book. Okay, so what this is people will say, you know, there's no right or wrong way to do this. You know, you've heard that many times. There's no right or wrong way to do this. If you're sober, you're doing it the right way. That's not what the directions in the book tell me. So I'll refer to, if you have your book, go to forward to the first edition. And in the first paragraph there, it says, we of Alcoholics Anonymous are more than 100 men and women who have recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. Then the second sentence says, to show other alcoholics precisely how we have recovered is the main purpose of this book. Now hold that page and go to page 20 in your book. On page 20 in your book, the first paragraph, at the end of the first paragraph, it says, if you are an alcoholic who wants to get over it, you may already be asking, what do I have to do? It says, it is the purpose of this book to answer such questions specifically. Now hold those 2 pages and go to page 29 in your book. It says, first paragraph, further on, clear-cut directions are given showing how we have recovered. So let me back up a minute. On your dust cover of the book, it says that the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous is a textbook. Right? That's what your dust cover says. It calls this a textbook. So it's not a novel. It's not to be read, it's to be studied. And how do you study a textbook? You refer one page to another, you make notes, you write down things, you come across a word you don't understand, you get a dictionary out, and you look it up. So if you put those 3 sentences together that I just read, it's going to tell me that, it's going to show me precisely how to recover, it's going to answer my questions specifically, and there's going to be clear-cut directions. If you look at those 3 statements, you can't make an argument for the fact that there's no right or wrong way to do this. There is a right or wrong way to do it. There's clear-cut, precise, specific directions on how to recover. So that's the first thing that I need to understand, is that there's a right or wrong way to do this. Somebody was talking to me last night, and they asked me, I think they said they had like 4 years. I know they can't be here this morning, but he said he had like 4 years, and he didn't want to, you know, he didn't kind of like in a spot where life is good and that's it. So what are we doing here? The book, like the program, is broken into 3 parts. The first part of our program is, what is the problem? That's identified in step 1. The second part of this program is, what is the solution? That's identified in step 2. Step 1 is the problem. Step 2 is the solution. Steps 3 to 12 take me there. So what is the problem? What is the solution? And what is the program of action? That's the 3 parts of our program. And that's the way the book is written also, into those 3 parts. What is the problem? What is the solution? What is the program of action? So once we get past step 1, we're not looking at the problem anymore. We're now into the solution and the program of action to take us to that solution. So, and any time, if anybody has a question, just raise your hand, because I don't want to spend the whole time talking to you. I want to talk with you this morning. And I want to try to answer questions. So I'm just going to talk for maybe half an hour, and then I'm going to do questions and answer for the rest of the time. Okay? And I find that to be very fulfilling. So, all right. So I have to understand then, what are some of the other things that we talk about here that we're not sure of and that don't make sense? In Alcoholics Anonymous, that they left us this beautiful program to work, they say that, here's a question that I like to ask people, okay? Why are you powerless over whatever your thing is? Why are you powerless? So, how many people like in their first couple of years? Okay. So let me ask you a question. What was your drug of no choice? Yeah. What was your drug that you used? Okay. So why are you powerless over that? You have no trust in God. So if you find trust in God, then you won't be powerless over that. Is that right? Okay. How many people trust in God? How many people trusted in God but can't stay sober? So I'll ask somebody else, the lady behind you. What was your drug of no choice? Marijuana and speed. Why are you powerless over that? Because of the obsession and the allergy? You're half right. Okay. So here's what happens. When you ask people, for lack of time, I want to kind of try to move things along. When you ask people why they're powerless over cocaine or alcohol or whatever it is that they're using, you usually get answers like, I can't control it. It controls me. Once I start, I can't stop. Those are your most common answers. But this is what we have to understand. Your lack of control, your loss of control, your inability to control is not why you are powerless. Those are results of being powerless. Does that make sense to you? We all know what happens once we take a hit or a drink. That's powerless on a whole different level. We have to get to the point to find out, why do I take that hit or drink when I swore to God I would never do it again the night before? When I tell myself I don't want to ever do it again and I find myself doing it. When I swear I'm never going to do it again and I find myself doing it again, damn it, that's powerless, and I need to get in touch with that. So if I ask you why you're powerless and you tell me what happens after you use, you've missed the whole point. I hope you're following me. If you're not and you have a question, please raise your hand. So if I ask you why you're powerless and you tell me what happens to you after you use, I can't control it, it controls me, you've missed the whole point. So another question I like to ask people that get it is, what is the first step in recovery? What is the first step in recovery? Anybody? What is the first step in recovery? To accept that we're powerless. Okay. And where do you get that from? Where do you get that from, to accept that we're powerless? Okay. Somebody raised their hand there. Okay. Okay. So usually people will say that the first step in recovery is we admitted we were powerless over alcohol or cocaine, that our lives have become unmanageable. And that's the first of the 12 steps, but it's not the first step in recovery. If you go to page 30 in the book that you didn't bring with you, you'll see that the second paragraph says, we learned that we had to fully concede to our innermost self that we were alcoholic. The next sentence says, this is the first step in recovery. So learning how to fully concede to my innermost self is what I have to do before I even get to the 12 steps. And then when I get to the first of the 12 steps, I'll understand the powerlessness and be able to admit it at that level. So let's talk a little bit more about some of the other things that we hear about in recovery. Some of the crazy things. Did you have somebody raise their hand for something? Okay. One of the things that I like to dispel is the if you say something, you should be able to go to the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous and back it up. If you can't, then what you're saying is your opinion, and you need to be careful of what you're passing on to the new people. Okay? So, yes. Yeah, and so you can hear it on the tape. She's asking about when somebody relapses, and is it between them and God? If you're their sponsor, it's not just between them and God, it's between you also. Not that you have the power to keep somebody sober, but you have the responsibility to pass on the correct message to somebody. And that's where I think we don't play the part that we really need to play. Because somebody came up to me not long ago, and they were all 10 years sober, and they were all happy, and they said, Dan, I'm starting to work the steps again. And I said, oh, cool, what are you working the steps on? And they said, alcohol and drugs. And I said, why? I sponsor a guy right now that has 47 years sober. You can't convince me that this man is powerless over alcohol. He's a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. He's not a member of CA, but he's one of my sponsees, and he's 47 years sober. Let me talk about myself. I'm 25 years sober. You can't convince me that I'm powerless over alcohol. I am not powerless over alcohol. I'm not powerless over cocaine. I'm not powerless over those things. I was 6 months sober, and I went to a speaker meeting. The person had like 12 years sober, and at the podium talking about, I'm powerless over this, I'm powerless over that, I'm powerless over this, I'm powerless over that. And I went like, what the hell am I doing here? 12 years, this is what I got to look forward for after 12 years, to be powerless over everything? This is about a way of living. It's about, the book says this is about a manner of living. And if I can put a manner of living into my life that is spiritual, that has these steps as a guideline to, and allows me to incorporate a God in my, and to make healthy decisions for myself, I am not powerless. If I don't do the things that I'm supposed to do on a regular basis. So my point is, after you've worked the steps and you're around for a year or two, what are you doing? Are you not working the steps? I do a private study, a private class, we call it, and I've been doing it every week for 24 years. And we go through the steps as a group. It takes us about 10 months. And there's a different amount. This season, I've got about 42, 43 people in the class. And together, we work the steps. It takes about 10 months. And so every year, I'm working the steps on something. The idea that I'm going to work the steps on alcohol and drugs makes no sense to me. I haven't had any in 25 years, more than that. So why would I waste my time? It's like we waste time praying to God for things that He's already given us. You know. So let's talk about God for a minute. Let's talk about, because that's one of the other misunderstandings that we have. There's a big faction of people in recovery. There's two factions. One faction will say we have a threefold disease: mind, body, and spirit. And the other faction will say we have a twofold disease: mental and physical. The big book of Alcoholics Anonymous does not back up a threefold disease ever. We have a twofold disease. If you ask somebody with the threefold, where does it say that? The only thing they can go to is page 64. The last paragraph says, resentment is the #1 offender. It destroys more alcoholics than anything else. From it stem all forms of spiritual disease. And they go right there, Danny, spiritual disease. That's where it says it in the book. And I says, it does say that, doesn't it? But they're not talking about alcoholism. They're talking about resentments. Not from alcoholism do we have a spiritual disease, but from resentments. Resentment is the #1 offender. From it stem all forms of, from what? From resentment. And then down a little bit further, it says, when the spiritual malady is overcome, we straighten out mentally and physically. And there you go, there it is again, spiritual malady. Malady means illness, disease. Now, malady also means sickness. And actually, the root origin of the word malady is from the French malade, which means, as you probably know better than me, sick. So that's the only spot. But there's 154 times in this book that Bill uses the words mental and physical or mind and body. Do you think that if they wanted us to believe that we had a threefold disease, that they'd mention it in here? They don't. And the reason that that's important is that if you believe you have a threefold disease, that means that the God that is in you, you've been able to pass the disease to that God. If you have a God that small in your life, I don't want nothing to do with that God. My God is too powerful for me to pass a disease on to him. So my disease is of mind and body. It's mental and physical. I know that's controversial because a lot of people were taught threefold. And when push comes to shove, does it make that much of a difference? No. But it is important to understand what we're talking about. So that's what the book says. Over and over and over again, it talks about a mental and physical, mind and body, mental and physical, mind and body. It doesn't talk about spiritual disease. It says that when we straighten out spiritually, we straighten out mentally and physically. But that's about the solution, not the problem. That's like I have a headache, so I'm going to take an aspirin, and I say, the aspirin is what gave me the headache. No, the aspirin is the solution. And back on page 64, one more time, it says, it says, for we have been not only mentally and physically ill, but we have been spiritually sick. So what they're saying is everybody in here has, at one time or another, has had a flu, right? If you got a bad flu in your home and your friend calls you up and says, how you doing? I don't know anybody ever in my lifetime that's answered that question by saying, oh my God, I have influenza. Because influenza is actually what you're dealing with. But when somebody calls you and asks you, you say, I got the chills, I'm sweating, I can't keep away from the toilet, I keep running to the toilet, I'm throwing up. You describe the symptoms of your illness. You don't describe the illness. How you doing? Oh, I've got influenza. Oh, how you doing? I can't stop shaking, I got a fever. You're describing the symptoms of your illness. And that's what he's describing here. We've not only been mentally and physically ill, we've been spiritually sick. Every person in the universe is spiritually sick to a greater and lesser degree. There's no human being that is not spiritually sick, including Mother Teresa when she was alive. She was spiritually sick also. We're all spiritually sick, but that doesn't constitute being an alcoholic or an addict. Every addict may be spiritually sick, but every spiritually sick person is not an addict. Okay, so being spiritually sick does not equate to being an alcoholic or an addict. It's something that we all share in. Having a mental and physical disease, the disease of mind and body, does equate to being an alcoholic or an addict. Okay, so let's move on. Let's talk about the second step, because that's a very important step. So one of the big things that I hear in the rooms is choose whatever concept you want of God. Use the doorknob. Use the light bulb. Use the dog. You've heard that, right? Has anybody not heard that? You'll definitely hear those things. It's our responsibility to point the people into the right direction. According to this book, there's 2 qualifications for a higher power. It is not okay to use a doorknob or a light bulb. I tell people that say that, I say, what happens when your light bulb burns out? Or what about if I kick your door in? Or what about if I shoot your friggin' dog? You're going to be godless then, aren't you? There's 2 qualifications for a higher power. Page 93 of the book you didn't bring with you this morning says, on the top of the page, in the middle of that top part, it says, If a man be agnostic or atheist, make it emphatic that he does not have to agree with your conception of God. He can choose any conception he likes, provided it makes sense to him. Qualification number 2. The God that you choose must make sense to you. Now, if you come to me and tell me the doorknob is my God, I'm going to say, if that makes sense to you, you might be in the wrong room. You might need one of those rooms that have padded walls so you can't hurt yourself. Because it's a power. The first qualification is in the step itself. Go to page 59 in the book you didn't bring with you. And it says, step 2, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. So the first qualification of a higher power is that it be a power greater than ourselves. So if you come to me and tell me that your doorknob is your higher power, well, I'll tell you that may make sense to you, but it's not a power greater than us. So you need to rethink what makes sense to you. And here's something that not a lot of us do. We need to talk to the people about God. That's not Danny's idea. I didn't make that up. It says so in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. It says we're going to talk about God. Page 45 of the book you didn't bring with you. All right, baby. And you got a right to have that attitude. I ain't talking to you, Esther. For those of you that didn't bring your book and that cannot turn to page 45, look over the person's shoulder that did bring their book. It says in the middle of the page, page 45, and it means, of course, that we are going to talk about God. Do not be ashamed to talk to the new people about God. Don't impose your God on them, but talk to them about God. A lot of people have the belief that the directions to step 2 is on page 47 of the book that Esther brought with her. We needed to ask ourselves but one short question: do I now believe, or am I even willing to believe, that there is a power greater than myself? People will say that's the directions for step 2. I just have to ask myself that one short question: do I believe, or am I willing to believe? And that's it. If that's it, I guess the next 16 pages are irrelevant, or the next 36 paragraphs are irrelevant. We could throw them all away. There's a lot of directions to the second step. That's just one of them. And if you look above that, it says, so that was growth. But if we wish to grow, we had to begin somewhere. So we'll begin at that question. Do I now believe, or am I even willing to believe? But then there's lots of other questions and concepts that I must challenge myself with. There's a point in this book where it says, page 53, when we became alcoholics, crushed by self-imposed crises we could not postpone or evade, we had to fearlessly face the proposition that either God is everything or else he is nothing. God either is or he isn't. What was our choice to be? It's asking you to make a decision right here, right now. Is God everything or is he nothing? I'll ask you that. Is God everything or is he nothing? He's everything. Sure, you say that. I've never met anybody that said, no, he's nothing. Esther.
I had a client who told me that he did not believe there was a God, and he needed to find some justice. He wouldn't repeat this. So I was kind of stunned because it was my first real interaction with someone who was adamant about not wanting to believe that there was a power greater than himself. So what would you say to someone at that point when they're not willing to make a decision or at least attempt to believe
Good question. The book answers that question. The book says we can use the group as a power greater than ourselves to begin with. I did that because I said last night, I didn't come here to find God. So we can use the group, but we have to grow beyond that. So, but I think when we're working with new people, that thank you. I think that if we're working with new people and we do spend the time to talk to them about God, I think we can get past those issues with people. But this is about a power greater than ourselves. And when you ask everybody, is God everything or is he nothing? Everybody always says he's everything. And I say, well, why don't you act that way then? If God is everything, why don't you act that way? If God is everything, why is your life in shambles? Why does your wife want to leave you? Why is the boss keep firing you? Why is you got these problems? What's going on with you if God is everything? It sounds good. It's what we're supposed to say, so we say it. God is everything. I'm not going to say God's nothing, and neither is the new person. So what is this God? You know, it's kind of like I want sobriety, and they don't know what sobriety is. I want God. I have no idea. We're going to talk about God in the second step. We absolutely are. Because in the third step, it's asking me to make a decision to turn my will and my life over. How can I possibly make a decision on something I haven't even begin to define yet? How can I possibly? It's impossible to do step 3 if I have no concept of God. And if you notice in step 3, it says God as we understood him. It's past tense. The understanding of God takes place before step 3. It takes place in step 2. The search for God begins in step 2. I must define a little bit what it is I think and believe about God. And then I could press change and rearrange that. But we're going to talk about God, and I think that's a big mistake that we make, that we don't spend time with the people talking about God. And what is God to you? What does that mean to you? What do you believe about God? You know, if you have negative beliefs like God's going to punish me, he's going to judge me, how can you possibly turn your will and your life over to the care of that? The analogy I use is simple. I tell people, hey, I'm going to open a finance company. Give me all your money. I'm going to make you rich. Are you going to give me all your money? Hell no. You're going to have a lot of questions. Once I answer all your questions and put you at peace with all those questions and appease you about all your questions, you then might give me a little something. But you ain't going to give me all your money. So nobody stops running and gunning after 20 years and comes in here and gives their life to the care of God. Bullshit. Nobody does that. It's impossible. But if I get comfortable, so you have to be comfortable with your God in order to turn your will and your life over to the care of him. If you're not comfortable, it's impossible to do. Once you become comfortable with the idea that I know what I'm doing about financing, you're going to want to, who am I investing with? Who else is investing? How much is it going to cost? When you're going to get your money back? How much you're going to make? What do I know about in finance business? And you want to know all these things. When I answer all your questions, you give me a little something. And that's what we do in recovery. When we become comfortable with the idea of God, we step into the next step. And as we continue to grow, we get faith. Faith is something that is born of experience. We don't get faith in step 2. Step 2 is about hope, not faith. You cannot have faith in something you don't believe in. You must first come to believe. Does all this make sense to you? Okay. So, anyway, okay. So, I kind of go over all of the stuff on all of the steps, but I think I'd rather just spend time talking to you guys and answering questions about the program of recovery, sponsorship, working the steps, whatever, any kind of question on recovery. The microphones are on if you want to ask a question. Who has a question? All right here. You go.
Hey, I have a question to something you said earlier. You said someone who cannot back up what they say with the big book is just talking from their opinions. And that makes sense to me. Now, what do you do at the group level, at the meeting level? Let's say you and Esther start a meeting in a new area, and you sit there, and suddenly you have 20 people in the room who are all very happy to open their mouths and say what they think. And that's actually not your experience from the big book, from your recovery. How do you deal with that? How do you manage that in a group, at the group level?
Oh, I call the CA police right away.
I thought so. Thank you. Give me their number.
Hello, CA police. We got a bunch of newcomers talking shit here. Oh, yeah. Oh. No, we need to call the CA people with the nets to catch them and bring them in. Well, you know, we can't control what happens in a meeting. We can control the meetings. And the way we control the meetings in our business meetings is we have a format that allows the chairperson to cut somebody off. And then we pick chair people that are able to cut people off. And we stick to the topic. You know, if you're new, I would highly suggest you go to structured meetings, big book meetings, 12 and 12 meetings, meetings of literature meetings, and not open topic discussions and talk about how I'm feeling and my washing machine's not working and all of that stuff. Go to structured meetings and read the literature. And then when people start talking off of what they just read, the chairperson has to be somebody that can ring a bell or stop them and say, please stay on topic and thanks for sharing, and get to the next person and keep the meeting structured. And I started lots of meetings over the years, and I helped write the formats to them, and then we pick the people that chair the meetings, and we have really good meetings. Good question, though. You had a question there?
You said everybody's spiritual sick, more or less. Can you explain further?
Yes, some more, some less. Everybody is spiritually sick. It's a human trait. Spiritual sickness is a human characteristic. So people like us are really bankrupt when we get here, spiritually bankrupt. And as the spiritual remedy takes us away from that little by little by little. So we start getting a little more spiritual. And you can't, if somebody's running around the rooms doing negative stuff, they cannot grow spiritually. You can't grow spiritually while practicing negative stuff. It just doesn't happen. It's impossible. So you can see people like that. They're usually mad as hell and frustrated all the time and blaming others. And, and they're just, they're not really very happy people. Who else has a question?
Hi, I had a question. I'm longer in the program, but not so long clean, and I have a problem with finding some higher power, especially when I see all the things happening in the world. I try, but then I see the next morning from attack from bombs or what, and I find it difficult. How can I?
Good question.
Try?
Good question. And I think there's a couple of ways to answer that. The first way is, if you've done a good, thorough first step, which goes way beyond asking, are you powerless over alcohol or whatever, and you've done a good, thorough first step, at the end of a good, thorough first step, you should be feeling pretty hopeless. At the end of a good, thorough first step, you should be feeling pretty defeated and pretty whooped. And the only thing for somebody at the end of a good first step is step 2, which is the promise of hope. It's wow, look how messed up I am and how messed up my life is. Oh, but there's hope for me. So that would be the first part of that. The second part of your question would be what you're doing with step 2. And the first thing I would ask you to do is to write down what you think and believe about God. And then we'd take a look at that. Not what God is, but what you think and believe about God. You know, and then we'll take a look at that. And from that list, we'll press change and rearrange that list. We'll remove all the negative things and we'll put positive things that aren't in there. And then we do what I like to call the fake it till you make it prayer. What does that mean? After I have my list of everything that God is, that I think God is now that I'm comfortable with, I've taken out the bad stuff. I added some stuff, that I didn't have in there. And every morning I get up and I say, God, today, even though I don't believe you are, and I read everything on my list out loud, today I'm going to act as if you are. And sometimes I have to do that 10 or 15 times throughout the day. But I have a list of what I like my God to be, and I'm going to fake it till I make it. And if you have a problem with fake it till you're making it, you're full of shit. Because we've been faking shit all our lives, and now you're getting sober and you have a problem with faking it? Fake it till you make it. If you keep affirming out loud to God what you believe that He is, one day you're going to be reading that list. And I've done this with literally more than hundreds of people. I dare to say thousands of people over the years. And nobody's ever come back to me and said it hasn't worked. Not one. Because there's going to come a point, I don't know when it will be, but you'll be reading that list and you'll say, God, even though I don't believe you are, and you start reading your list and you go, wait a minute, I do believe that. And that's what they're talking about when we say, came to believe. I didn't come here believing. I got to that point. Good question. You got a question there? You even got a book too. How about that?
I was wondering if I can read something because I knew people.
No, if you have a question, yes. This is my workshop. After the workshop, you can share that with him. Yeah, we don't have a lot of time, so if you have a question, yes. If you want to share something with somebody that might help them, grab them as soon as this meeting is over, and you're welcome to do that. Karen, you have a question? 2 questions. All right. She's an addict. She wants more than one. Yeah.
Still do. The unmanageabilities that one talks about, which refers to question mark.
That's a good question too. The unmanageability. See, if you recognize the dash in between the powerlessness and the unmanageability, and understand what the English language, what that means, that dash means that it's the same sentence, but it's a completely separate thought. So if it said, I'm powerless over alcohol and my life is unmanageable, then that would mean that the unmanageability is related to my powerlessness. But it doesn't say and, it has a dash, it's a separate thought. So that means that my unmanageability is not related, is not because of my powerlessness, but my life is unmanageable regardless. And today, with all my sobriety, my life is unmanageable. And that's why each morning when I wake up, I need to hook up with my God, and I need help and awareness and to straighten out my life. And I incorporate God in my life each day, because left to my own devices, I run into the brick wall swearing this time is going to be different. Maybe not drink and use, but some bad behaviors. So my unmanageability is something that I address on a daily basis, even today. I don't address my powerlessness over alcohol and drugs, but I address my powerlessness over other things, whatever I'm working the steps on. So yes, the unmanageability is about incorporating God into my life to help me with that. What was your other question?
The difference between phenomenon of craving and addiction.
The difference between a what?
Phenomenon of craving and addiction.
The phenomenon of craving and addiction. Good question. The phenomenon of craving is a physical result of having alcohol or drugs introduced to my body. So it's a three-step process. I introduce a chemical to my body. I ignite the allergy. And the manifestation of that is the phenomenon of craving. That's important because, see, people say, I take a drink and I get a phenomenon of craving. Maybe not. Because it's possible to be allergic to strawberries and eat strawberries and not break out in hives. I have to ignite the allergy. That's why in the book, Bill gives us a test. He says, try it. And he says, try it a few times, because he knows you can't get away with it continuously. You will eventually set the allergy off. So the The craving is a physical result of your allergy being set off. And addiction is different. There's a difference between an allergy and addiction. An allergy is an abnormal reaction. You get it? An addiction is, let me say it like this. If you're addicted to heroin and you take a shot of heroin, you temporarily lessen the desire for more, right? If you're addicted to nicotine and you smoke a cigarette, you temporarily lessen the desire for more. So when you appease the addiction, it lessens the desire for more. When you appease the allergy, it greatens the desire for more. Like I'm allergic, I have hay fever, so if I'm subjected to pollen or stuff, my eyes start running and my nose starts running, and if I rub my eyes, I can't stop. Or if I get a rash from something and I scratch it, every time I do that, it greatens the desire. If I touch my eyes when my allergies bother me, I could take a fork and rub my eyes. It's that bad, right? So the allergy greatens the desire for more, where the addiction lessens the desire for more. And that's why Dr. Silkworth uses the word allergy over and over again, rather than the word addiction. Does that answer your question? Jim?
After drugs and alcohol kicked my ass, and I came into the program, you know, my conception of God was all-powerful, all-loving. And through working the steps, my life was recreated. So why didn't God recreate my life before that?
Well, because, it's very simply put, because he gave you self-will. You know, God, you know, people are always quick to point out all the bad things in life. You know, people did this. How could that little girl suffer like that? How could all this whole family get, well, how could God let this, how could God doesn't let that stuff happen? God gave you self-will. Do you think, does anybody in here not believe that God gave you self-will? Does everybody believe God gave you self-will? Then do you think he's up there going, oh shit, I made a mistake with that damn Paul. I shouldn't have gave him self-will. No. God says, God gave you self-will, and he's up there laughing his ass off probably, watching you do what you do. I shared last night that there came a point in my life that I think God said, this guy's had enough. Let me send some angels down to save him. You know, and I truly believe that. So God gave us self-will, and what happens to us is because of the things we do. It's usually out of our selfishness and self-centeredness. That's the root of our troubles, we think. So, good questions, though. Who else got a question? Come on, we're on a roll. No, you won't. Get up there. I'm running the show here.
Okay, so sometimes in Ireland particularly, I don't know about our meetings, but people identify with the drug as the problem, and they say, well, you're a real deal addict if you took heroin, and they're kind of passing on a message that the drug is the problem. And sometimes when I hear that, I don't know, do you ever come across that when people kind of saying, well, you're only a real deal addict if you took methadone or if you took heroin? Yeah. You hear that stuff a lot. Thank you. That's a good question too. You know, that's why I say we need to stick. It's my responsibility to pass on the message that's in the book. So if I'm in a meeting, and in fact, God's honest truth, not even 2 weeks ago, a lady with 12-something years in a regular meeting that I was in, she was sharing about the cravings that she gets with 12 years sober. And I shared after her, because I don't want the newcomer to think that they're going to have 12 years and be suffering from cravings. And I just shared simply that, you know, when we talk about cravings, we really mean obsession, and one is of the mind and one is of the body. The craving is of the body, nothing can be done about it. But obsession is of the mind, and I can change my mind.
even though the process may be difficult. It's as simple. I change my mind all the time. I'm going to wear these pants. I'm going to eat lunch here. I'm going to do that. It's a little more difficult to not drink or use, but it's the same concept. I can change my mind. An obsession is of the mind. A craving is of the body. Good question. All right. Who else got a question? All right, come on. I was about to sing and dance for you. Oh, by the way, I forgot. At 12 noon, Dave's giving dancing lessons in the ballroom back there. If anybody saw him on the dance floor last night.
So my sponsor, my sponsor used to say to me, Nadia, it's a spiritual program, not an intellectual one. And sometimes I find it hard to separate the two or not to mix the two together.
Yeah.
So how do I do that?
Well, another good question. You can't intellectualize that which is spiritual. You just can't do it. And I remember my sponsor said to me, I was a couple of years sober, he said, "You're very smart, Danny." I said, "Thank you." He said, "That wasn't a compliment." But simply put, you cannot intellectualize that which is spiritual. So, you can have a PhD. In fact, most of us do have pitiful, hopeless, dope fiend degrees. But you can have a degree, and a degree is something nice that can hide a crack on the wall, but it can't hide a flaw in your character. Esther.
I have a question. Someone asked me recently about going out to have outside help. And so they did their 4-step, and it come to realize that they had a whole lot more to deal with in relationship to one of the things that they're suffering from. And so someone told them that they wouldn't be able to help them, and that they didn't want to hear about it anymore.
Yeah, that someone who told them that doesn't understand what we're here for. I'm a firm believer that every problem that I have, the answer is in the book. The 12 steps will take care of any problem. Now, does that mean somebody shouldn't go to seek further help? I would never tell anybody not to. If it's their first go-around, I tell people, all I want you to do is this 12 steps. When we get through with the 12 steps, I don't give a shit what you do after that, but as long as you keep doing the steps. But I just want you to do this now. So I think we can address every problem here, and that's what we're here for. See, if I started telling you before, I sponsored a guy with 47 years sober. He don't need to work the steps on alcohol and drugs, but I guarantee you, I'm his sponsor, I guarantee you he needs to work the steps on some other shit in his life.
One question, Danny, I'm sorry. One of the things I wanted that the person was talking about was, it was a sexual issue. So what I think some people are missing is that in the 4th step, right, that there is a sexual inventory. And so if we do the sexual inventory, then we can deal with the sexual issues, and we don't have to act like we don't want to mention them.
Yeah, absolutely. If you answer the questions on page 69 to each of your relationships, was it selfish or not, and all those things, and you inventory that your sexual conduct. I had a guy sponsor one time, and he gave me his 4th step on the sexual inventory, and he literally wrote erotica. I mean, he literally, let me see if I could clean it up. I was furiously pounding my neighbor's wife on the kitchen table as the rain beat on the window. This is the kind of stuff that he gave me, and I went, this is not erotica. You see, and on the sexual inventory in the 4th step, it's different than the other things that we inventory on the 4th step. Because in the sexual inventory, we're not looking at the physical. It's not about who was in my bed, but rather who's in my head. What's in my head rather than who's in my bed. You know, it's not I was pounding my neighbor's wife on the kitchen table. It was what lack of morals, values, and beliefs allowed you to be with your neighbor's wife. Yeah. That's what we're going to get at in the fourth step. What's in my head? What allowed me to act out deviantly in this sexual way? You know, what allows me to do that? Not the act itself. You know, with resentments and fears, it's about physical and mental. With sexual inventory, it's the mental. And it says so in the book. It says so in the book, because real quick, I'll go to your fourth step in the book, and it says, okay. Now about sex, page 68. Many of us needed an overhauling there. Okay, so the question is, can you overhaul a sexual act that you had yesterday? No. Can you overhaul a sexual act you had last week? No. Last month? No. 10 years ago? No. So what they're doing is they're setting you up for future sex life, future relationships. So it's not about the physical, it's about the mental. If I do this work, then my next relationship might be a little healthier. And so it's about what's in my head, not who's in my bed. Claudia, go ahead.
When you work with a new guy, you know, I've been very, you know, I always hear contradictory things. The book says you cannot transmit something that you haven't got. But in a lot of really good lineages of sponsorship, it's customary to say if you have 48 hours sober, you can reach out to the person with 24 hours sober. So how do you guide your sponsees on that at the beginning? How to get out of self, and how do you protect the man with a 24 hours sober from the madness of the 48 hours sober person?
Yeah, good question. Fair question. Yeah, obviously the guy with 2 days can talk to the guy with 1 day, but he can't sponsor him because he's got nothing to give him. You know what I mean? I get a kick when I'm in meetings and I hear somebody share about, you know, I got my job back, the wife let me in the house, and the dog's letting me pet them, and everything's great. Next week I'll have 30 days. This program really works. That's not the program working, because you don't have a damn clue about the program yet. That's just the blessings of God and the fact that you have stopped drinking and using for 30 days. Anybody that stops drinking and using, their life gets better to a degree. But it's not about how great the program is, because you ain't done shit yet. You don't know nothing about the program. So a person with 2 days can certainly talk to somebody with 1 day. A person with 2 hours could talk to somebody with 1 hour. But I wouldn't suggest that first person tells that second one what to do. Yeah, but talking to people helps.
Hi, good morning. I'm working with someone. I'll tell them about God. I've got a loving, powerful God in my life. So how do I explain the question who causes the war?
People.
People.
Self-will.
Self-will. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
And how do I explain, okay, what about the tsunami and what about the natural disasters of the world?
What about them?
Who causes that? If there's a God that you call,
I believe the tsunami comes from the ocean, right?
Is it not
It's
God's
water.
ocean?
It's about water, isn't it?
Is it God's ocean?
Is it God's action? No, it's the ocean's action.
Is that not to do with God?
How the ocean reacts has got to do with the ocean. The fact that God created the ocean, you know, God created roses. Roses have thorns. People go, oh, roses have thorns. And I go, oh, thorns have roses. How nice.
So would the same philosophy work for a tornado or whatever?
It's, you know, it is what it is. The earth is here. I don't believe personally that there's a God up there going, you're going to get sober, you're going to get sober, you're going to suffer like a bastard. You're going to get sober, you're going to get sober, you're going to suffer. You're going to sober, you're going to be sober, you're going to die. I don't believe there's a God up there doing that. I think God has given us all the the great thing about recovery is that everybody that comes into the room has the same exact equal opportunity to get sober as anybody else. Nobody has an edge on this deal. The fact is, what are you willing to do? Now, in life, people that are in recovery, they have free will. If they choose to do something bad, that's their business. It's not God. If the ocean reacts the way it does, maybe it needs to do that for the ocean to survive. I don't know. You know?
Nothing in God's world happens by mistake, right? And we believe that God is everything.
If God is everything, then no, nothing happens by mistake. I sure don't like some of the shit that happens,
So
but
if I'm seeing God in the ocean, I see it as God, correct me, I could be wrong here. It's God's world. God is doing whatever he needs to do. I don't necessarily have to understand it, right?
well, I think you got the last part right. You don't have to understand it, but it's not God making the ocean cause a tsunami. It's the ocean making the ocean cause a tsunami, and God created the ocean. You know, I helped create my children. I have 3 daughters and 4 granddaughters. Tell me God ain't got a sense of humor. 7 women in my life. 3 daughters, 4 granddaughters. I helped create them. I have no control over what they do except to try to teach them good values in life. My oldest granddaughter is 22 years old, so none of my grandchildren have ever seen me loaded. And they've all seen me on a spiritual path. So, you know, hopefully that means something to them, but, you know, if they choose to do wrong and be negative and hurt people, that's their business, you know. So I don't try to control my children. I just try to teach them what's good. And I think God does the same with us. He gave us free will, therefore he doesn't control us. He just tries to teach us what's good. It's up to us to pay attention to what he's trying to teach us.
Thank you, Danny.
Yes. Dave? I'm gonna call you Dancing Dave from now on. Hey.
That's at 12:15, not 12 o'clock, yeah? The question I have is, I have a man in my own group, Tuesday, disclosed that he used to be on Valium, prescribed them. He hasn't taken any for a little while. He's had an anxiety, well, he said his anxiety's built up and his anger's built up, so he's taken one. Now, I class it as a relapse. Would you class it as a relapse?
Here's what I classify as a relapse. If you take 10 aspirins with the intention of altering your mind, that's a relapse. Now, 10 aspirins aren't going to do anything to you, so you didn't get high. But if you took them, now, if you take 2 morphine pills because the doctor prescribed them to you, that's not a relapse. So it's about my motive. What are my motives? If I'm trying to alter the way I feel through chemicals, that's a relapse. If I'm trying to alter the way I feel through bad conduct, that's a spiritual relapse. But if I'm following, Tuesday morning, as soon as I get home, I'm going to the Spine Institute because I got a collapsed disc, and I've been in a lot of pain with this whole episode at the airport. I was in a wheelchair, getting wheeled all over the place. That's why I wasn't with you on the dance floor last night, Dave. But I'm taking a leave. That's all I'm taking for it. I could get some really strong Vicodin or something, but I choose not to. I'd rather feel the pain. Makes me know I'm alive. Pain is a motivator.
Absolutely. In the first step, it is written that I gave my will and my life over to the care of God as I understand him. But my experience is that I don't understand God, but I experience God more. What's your opinion on that?
It's a good question. That's why I said it's impossible to turn your will and your life over to something you haven't defined or come to understand yet. So too many people don't do any work in the second step, and they go to the third step, and they move right on through, you know, from the third step right to an inventory process, and they haven't defined who or what their God is to them. So it's impossible to do a third step unless you've done some good work in step 2. So somebody over here had a question. I think somebody's going to get up. Okay. Huh? You're confused?
Yeah.
Okay, let me see if I can confuse you some more. What's your question?
You know the way you were talking about the threefold illness, and it's not threefold, and it's just mental and physical. You know, in the doctor's opinion, where it talks about restless, irritable, and discontent. Like, is that not because you're spiritually, like, ill at ease?
Yeah, listen, everybody in the world has got a spiritual malady.
Yeah.
Everybody, some worse than others. But because I'm spiritually sick doesn't mean I have a disease of the spirit.
Yeah.
Let me share this with you guys, because people are always questioning this. And here's just 3 AA pamphlets. This one is called Frequently Asked Questions About AA. And the question here is, what is alcoholism? And the answer is, the explanation that seems to make sense to most AA members is that alcoholism is an illness, a progressive illness which can never be cured, but which, like some other diseases, can be arrested. Going one step further, many AAs feel that the illness represents the combination of a physical sensitivity to alcohol and the mental obsession with drinking. That's AA's answer. Is there an alcoholic in your life? The alcoholic is a sick person suffering from a disease for which there is no known cure. Because it is an illness, a physical compulsion combined with a mental obsession to drink. Again, no mention of the spiritual. This is AA, an introduction to the AA program. And I always bring these because people don't want to take my word for it. So, while they're, okay, most of us agree that for us, alcoholism can be described as a physical compulsion coupled with the mental obsession, no mention of spiritual. So, in all of AA's literature, it does not in any way, shape, or form call our disease a threefold disease, mind, body, and spirit. It doesn't do it. It only says that we have an illness of that we're spiritually sick, and that we have a mental and physical disease. Well, everybody has it. It's a learned thing that we learn growing up. It's kind of like fears, right? There's 2 fears that people are born with. Do you know what they are? Does anybody know what the 2 fears are? No, you're not born with the fear of dying. Children, at birth, human beings are born with 2 fears: the fear of falling and the fear of loud noises. It's a scientifically medical proven fact. All children are born with the fear of falling and the fear of loud noises. Everything else is learned. Every other fear you have growing up is learned. Okay, so even as an adult, I still had the fear of falling. I had a fear of heights. Who else has a question? Go ahead. I think we got about 10 minutes, so if you got a question, you're thinking of one, now would be the time to go ahead.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I have a voice problem, but I hope my voice is working. The big book, and you said that we have a free choice, we have a free will, and I disagree it. I don't think we have a free will, because in my life I had terrible things happened. I didn't choose for them. I had a trauma about it, and it triggered my addictions, my alcohol and gambling addiction. And it brought me to AA. I never choose for AA. I came in AA and other fellowships because it was the only way to survive. Otherwise, I would die. So,
let me ask you something, though. I don't think I said that the book says we have free will, a free choice.
But I disagree it because...
yeah, I'm saying I don't think that I said that the book says we have free will. I don't think I said that the book has that. I think I was saying that God gave us free will.
Yeah.
Free will, yeah.
I call it karma. The big book never talked about karma, but my opinion or whatever in my life, I see that karma brought me this. And I also think that God didn't give us a free will because we live in patterns. I do the same things all over and all over again. And when I'm free of it, when I'm delighted or whatever, then I have a free will. So do you believe in karma? And why doesn't talk the big book about karma?
Well, I can't tell you why the book doesn't talk about karma. I believe in karma. Karma's a bitch. That karma's a bitch, really. But I don't think that, again, it was me saying that God gave us free will. I wasn't saying the book says we have free will. I don't believe the book says that. But shit happens to us. Because God gave us free will doesn't mean that everything happens to us is because of what we did. A lot of things happen to us because of what others did. But it's still from free will. It's others' actions, not our own. So we got time for like 1 or 2 more questions. Come on. Or is it, what time are we finishing here? Is it 10:30? 10:45. Okay, we got 15 minutes then. Go ahead.
Yeah, you talked about step 2, making a list of your own God.
Yes.
How do you do that with your sponsees? Can you explain that to me?
Yeah. Well, first of all, we go through we agnostics, paragraph by paragraph, talking about it. And then when we went through that, then we go through, I ask them to write down what they think and believe about God. If a newcomer comes in and gives me a list that says all of these wonderful things about God and nothing negative on their list, I know they're not being honest. Now, if you ask somebody like Paul or Esther or somebody or Karen or somebody that's been sober for a while to write a list about what they think and believe about God, I would expect that list to be all good stuff. But not a newcomer. You know, a newcomer's got to believe some negative things about God. I mean, it only makes sense, you know, some fear of God or some God's going to punish them or judge them or something, you know, and if it's not on their list, then I'm real leery about how honest they are with themselves about that. So I talk more with them about it. And then when we get that list out, then we go through the process of removing the things that are negative, writing a new list, and then saying, is there anything you'd like your God to be, but you don't believe that he is? And if they say, yeah, like, one of the things I added to my list was I wanted a God with a sense of humor. Oh boy, was I right. Yeah, I got a heck of a sense of humor. So, and then, so God, so we put that stuff in and we have that new list, and then we do the fake it till we make it prayer till we get there. No, it really works. Anybody got anything about any other steps or anything else? Come on. 11, another half hour. All right, we'll go through the whole damn book then.
This was about step 8 and 9 actually.
Okay.
Step 8, is it for me to judge who I harm? For example, if someone bought cocaine from me, did I harm them? And also in step 9, is it for me and my sponsor to decide what will harm people if I do a 9th step? I see a lot of people some people they will do 9 step on everyone who they interacted with through their active period, and some other people, they can find excuses for not doing 9th step on everyone.
Yeah, that's real common. You know, the first thing I let people know is that you're not an other. You're not an other. And so the book says, except when to do so would harm them or others. You're not an other. So but you have to think about some things, okay? So let me use my own example for you. When I got sober, there was no way I didn't get sober to spend the rest of my life in prison. So there was no way I was gonna go to the police and tell them I did this, this, that, and this. Talking with my sponsor, we realized that some things sometimes we don't ever get the opportunity to make the amends. The important thing is, are you entirely ready to? And if you are entirely ready to, it might be a circumstance where you don't have to. So, but you have to talk with, that's really between you and God and your sponsor. And you have to be at a point where, are you really being honest? If you're really being honest and are you ready to make the amends, you're going to spend 5 years in prison, I probably would have done that. In 10 years in prison, I maybe would have thought a little more. Spend the rest of my life in prison? No, I wasn't going to admit to that stuff. I didn't get sober for that. So, and that's just, you can say I'm wrong for that, and that's okay. But there's some things I did that I'm not going to go and tell on. Okay, who's got a question? All right.
Hi, everybody. Good morning.
Morning.
I have a question about what do you think about that God remove all my character defects? Can he? And can they all disappear?
Well,
is it possible?
All of my character defects have been removed except for one. I still lie.
Okay.
So that means, I guess he hasn't removed them all. The book answers that question, actually. The book says that he's not going to render us white as snow. And that my belief in it is, I'm glad you asked that because nobody's asked about 6 and 7 yet. So my belief is that God doesn't remove any defects. What he does is he allows us to replace them with good things. And when we stop practicing the good spiritual things, that old shit comes right back because it never really went anywhere. That's my experience. The book doesn't say that, but that's my experience. I heard somebody say years ago that character defects are like in-laws. You can't stop them from coming over. Just don't let them unpack their bags. Did you get that? I'll say that again because that was pretty damn good. Character defects are like in-laws. You can't stop them from coming over. Just don't let them unpack their bags. All right, later you're going to go, oh, damn, that was good. Yeah. So, yeah, I think that God allows us to practice different things. And when we stop the spiritual path, that old shit is just still there for us, So, yeah. I think 6 and 7 are probably the most misused steps that there are. Those of you, a few people in here that work with me in the steps know that I absolutely insist on working 6 and 7 on a daily basis. I incorporate my 6 and 7 step with my 11th step. What defect am I working on today? And in my morning meditation, I ask God for awareness that throughout the day, may I be aware of what this defect is, when it's popping up, or when I'm in it, and then give me the strength to get out of it, which He already has given me that. So that's 6 and 7 are really, the book says that's what separates the men from the boys and the women from the girls. That's where all the work is done in 6 and 7. Good question. All right, who else got a question? Oh, okay.
Shall I hand them out? Or?
Yeah, if you'd like to. He's gonna hand out the thing I read last night. Thank you. Okay, go ahead.
Good morning, I'm Thea.
Hi.
Alcoholic. My English is terrible. I will try say it in English.
It would help me if you come a little closer to the mic. Yeah.
I'm never proud of that I'm sober. And then they say, stick to the winners. And when someone is relapsed, then it is for me terrible of moeilijk. Wat is moeilijk? Difficult om bij de winners. Of you for so many years sober, are you proud of it? I'm not proud of it. And I will.
So I don't know if we have a language barrier here, or are you just ungrateful?
Are you ungrateful?
No. Wel dankbaar, maar niet trots of zo. En of dat geneest, ik weet niet wat het woord trots betekent.
You're grateful, but you don't feel proud.
No.
Then you're not grateful.
Oh. Okay.
You know, my lesson in life is that when I was a little kid, my grandmother, she had me pegged. She knew me better than anybody, and I was just a little kid. Because all of my brothers and all of my cousins, there were many of us, I was the only one she had a special name for. Just a little kid. She called me Ungraziad. Mr. Ungrateful, she'd call me. She'd say, Ungraziad, venica. And when she talked to me. So she knew that I was ungrateful, even as a little kid. And what I learned in my life is that when I am not grateful for what I have, I can't keep it. I've lost everything in my life that I wasn't grateful for. My family, my this, my that. Everything that I was never grateful for, I was never able to keep. So if I'm sober, I'm grateful. If I'm grateful, I'm proud of that. I'm proud of the fact that I'm sober. I haven't had a drink. I'm proud of the fact that I have the ability to help other people. I'm proud of the fact that I have people in my life that love me, and I'm grateful for the fact that this is what we do. And because I'm grateful, I'm proud of those things. They're good things. In that context, grateful and proud go together. They're inseparable. So in that respect. So if you say you're grateful but you're not proud, you're not grateful enough. You need to get some more gratitude.
Thank you.
Let me say one more thing to you also. Gratitude is not a feeling. It's an action. It's not about how I feel. Grateful is how I feel. Gratitude is what I do. So if you're grateful, that's the feeling. If you talk about gratitude, what are you doing? And if you're doing the right things to prove that you're grateful, then you'll be proud of all that. I hope that made sense to you.
Step 11.
Step 11.
Yeah. An idea comes into my head and I think I need to go there, talk to that person. How do I make that call? Is that God's will for me, or is it my self-will, my old craziness trying to sell me a lie?
Say that again.
I have an idea. I believe it's God's will for me. How do I know that to be true? How do I make the distinction between I'm trying to sell myself something that's wrong versus this is something that's right and I need to do it because God wants me to do it?
A great question and very common. In fact, the 12 and 12 talks a lot about signing God's name to our bullshit. You know, so the best answer to that is real simple. Talk about it, pray about it, write about it. If you do those three things, you'd never make the wrong move. Talk to your sponsor or somebody else in recovery. Write down a list of everything that's good that can happen and everything bad that can happen, and pray about it. Talk about it, write about it, pray about it. You'll always make the right decision. But let's talk about step 11 for a minute, because I'm amazed at how many people have no friggin' idea what step 11 is about. Oh, sure, they can tell you it's about prayer and meditation. But if you ask them what they do in the morning for their prayer and meditation, they'll talk about how many meditation books they read. My first couple of years sober, I had about 14 meditation books. And it'd take me about 20 minutes, half an hour to sit down and read them all while I was drinking coffee and smoking a cigarette. And then I was finished with my coffee and finished with the books, and I went about my day thinking I just did my 11th step. The 11th step doesn't say, sort through reading meditation books to improve my conscious contact with God. It doesn't say that. In fact, the amazing thing is how simple the 11th step really is and how uncommon practiced it is. It says, so sort through prayer and meditation. So it's telling me what to use, for what reason? To improve my conscious contact with God. Now it tells me that praying only for knowledge of His will for us, and then the power to carry that out. It's really very simple here. I see nothing about reading a meditation book. So I personally haven't read a meditation book, and I know CA has one out now. I've never seen it. I mean, I've seen it. I've never opened it up and read it. I personally haven't read a meditation book in probably 23 years. Not one page, not one time. I have been in some meetings where they read from the daily living thing, whatever, and they have that's the only connection I have with meditation books. Because, and I don't say that if that's something that you like, I would tell you, go keep reading them in addition to your 11th step, but not in lieu of your 11th step. Reading a meditation book is not meditating. It's not using prayer and meditation to improve your conscious contact with God. And that's not praying only for knowledge of His will for us and the power to carry it out. It's you reading a damn book. And I don't know how much of a conscious contact you can have from reading. You may read something really cool, really spiritual, really lovely, and when you finish reading it, go, oh, that's beautiful. Oh, I feel God. I feel so close to God after reading that. Great. That thing that they're passing around now, to me, is a beautiful reading that makes me I like it. But that's not my 11th step. And neither is anything you read in the morning out of a book. The 11th step specifically says, sort through prayer and meditation. So it's very important you learn how to pray and learn how to meditate, and you ask God, you pray only for knowledge of His will and the power to carry that out. That's all you need to do in the 11th step. And when you're done with that, if you want to read a meditation book or 2 or 3, go right ahead. But don't do that as your 11th step, because that is not the 11th step. Okay, good question now. Thank you. All right, who else got a question?
My book. No, I guess I'm stuck still on the threefold and twofold a little bit.
Okay.
I always thought it was.
You're not the only one, I can tell you that.
I also thought it was threefold, and I understand what you mean by the world is spiritually sick, but I can't go to work, for example, and say, yeah, how are you doing? Yeah, I feel like I have a hole inside me with the wind blowing through. You know, I can only go to a meeting and get that identification. And when a newcomer comes in, that's also the way that we identify so well. We were all born with that and feeling it so intensely.
Born with what? We're all born with
emptiness.
what? I wasn't born with an emptiness.
I was born with very strong.
I know, but you just said we were all born with that.
Okay, I can
Don't put your shit on me.
You're right.
I got enough of my own shit.
Okay, I was, and what I
wasn't. Go ahead.
Okay, most people I've met identify with that, and then newcomers, as soon as we talk about it, they identify it with it right away. I notice, and I certainly did.
Right, and what is that hole that you're talking about? What is that hole?
For me, I explained it as a spiritual emptiness that I was born with. That's
and you're absolutely right. It is a spiritual emptiness.
And I understand that the rest of the world also has that, but I really believe that I'll speak for myself, was born with it much more intense, feeling it much more intense than normal people.
I won't disagree with any of that. If that's your feelings, those are your feelings. I don't disagree with none of that, but you haven't told me one thing that proves we have a threefold disease. You just told me how you feel and how a lot of people feel.
That I noticed that so intensely in the meetings also.
Yeah, and I agree with you, but you still haven't showed me anything that says you have a threefold disease. Your emptiness, that those holes that you have, and I have them too. I had them too, but I wasn't born with mine. I don't believe I was born with mine because I knew there was a time in my life where I knew peace and happiness, when I was a little kid. But I developed those holes. But again, just because we're spiritually sick to greater or lesser disease does not mean that we have a spiritual disease. That in my innermost self, where God is in me. The book tells me that God's in me. And so if God's in me, the book says he's in you too, right? So that God that's in me, if you went with the threefold disease, the spiritual disease, is that the God that's in me is diseased. He's blocked off, yes. Yeah, he's blocked off, but it's a spiritual sickness that every human being has. Some are to have them to great degrees, like you just shared. She had a hole in her entire life. But that doesn't mean that you have a spiritual disease. It just means that your spiritual sickness is deep. Yeah. Well, our literature backs up the disease of mind and the disease of body over and over and over again. Our selfishness and our self-centeredness is that's the root of our troubles. Well, the spiritual malady is our spiritual sickness. So the sicker we are, the more selfish and self-centered we are. Okay? So if I'm selfish and self-centered, then everything revolves around me. The entire universe revolves around me. And selfish and self-centered people suffer deeply from fears. The book says 100 forms of fear: self-delusion, self-seeking, self-pity. When I live like that, there's no way I can live like that without stepping on other people's toes, because I'm always trying to take a shortcut to get what I want and to get it first and to get the most of it. It's all about me. And when I live like that, I can't live like that without stepping on other people's toes. Well, other people have the same things going on that I do. And the book says when I step on their toes, they retaliate and cause pain and suffering in my life. And the first thing I say is, how could you do that to me after all I've done for you? So it's a vicious cycle that doesn't end unless I get onto a spiritual path and start filling up these holes in me, which is what we do in recovery. We fill these holes up when we become whole. Now, the solution is spiritual. The problem is mental and physical. The disease is mental and physical. But we have a spiritual solution for that. So, go ahead.
God is in me and I am in God. So for me, it's how I move towards God for myself. From the God in me, I move to the God in you. So it's for me so simple. But I try to explain it to my sponsors and it's difficult. But the steps are for me how I move to outside, to you and the world. And a new vision and new pair of glasses is for me so simple. So it's the steps gave it to me. A new vision on the world.
Yeah.
And
there's a good, if you look at step 2, if you're asking how can you share that with your sponsees, step 2 is the answer for that. It says, it came to believe that power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. Us to sanity. So it's not my job to fix you. It's God's job. I'm relieved of that responsibility. So there's a lot of power in that. But I want to get back to what you were saying, because a lot of people get stuck on this, that just because you, at great depth and length, you feel this spiritual emptiness. If you really think about it, people like us never experiencing anything on little grounds, right? I've always joked and said, when I stub my toe, nobody in the entire universe has ever felt the pain that I feel when I stub my toe. When I'm sick, nobody's ever been as sick as I am. So when I have this awareness of my spiritual emptiness, nobody's ever had that like me. So when I hear somebody say, I have a spiritual disease, easy for me to buy into that. But if we're going to the book, you have to show me in the book where it says I have a disease that's spiritual. It doesn't. And I just read for you AA's answer to that question. So I have fact in writing right here that says it isn't. Where do you have fact in writing that says it is? It doesn't change how you feel about that emptiness. But just look at it differently. It's not a disease, it's a sickness. Everybody has it, you have it a little more. So you got to do a little more work to feel better. You got to do twice as much work as somebody else. Big deal. It gives you twice the motivation to get well.
I just want to say 2 things. First thing is, what I know from my own experience is that when under the influence of any type of drug or alcohol, I have no capacity to live based on what I believe God would have me to do, because I'm controlled by the substance that I intake, pretty much. My mind is based on what can I do to satisfy that.
Yeah.
And so my ability to live in a spiritual place, I can't do, because then I'm gonna be really sick if I think about what God would have me to do, and I just stole your microwave and helped you look for it.
Yeah. Well, but that goes with it. It doesn't even have to be alcohol and drugs.
Exactly.
It could be anything.
Exactly. And so what I was gonna say, the next point is that my spirituality, or this spiritual disease, or whatever you want to call it, in my opinion, I hope that no one makes this so much of an issue, because the truth is, it's not that important. It really isn't. The truth is, I have a mental obsession and an allergy of my body. And until I take care of these 2 things, my spirituality gonna suck.
Yeah.
Okay? Not because I'm diseased spiritually, but because my mental obsession and my allergy of my body doesn't allow me to function in my spirituality in the way that I would if I wasn't sick here and if I wasn't sick here.
Yeah.
So there really is no argument about whether it's a 3-fold, 2-fold. The truth is, get sober and stay sober, and it's all gonna work out like it's supposed to.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Esther. Yeah, absolutely. You know, it's when you say it's not a big deal, it really isn't a big deal. The reason I always bring it up is because I'm trying to help the newcomer not get subjected to that. And you know, the simple truth is this: just show me in the book where it says that you have a 3-fold disease, you have a spiritual disease, and we'll apologize and shut up. But no, I'm not talking about you right now. I'm just.
But let me say this:
Yeah.
neither does it doesn't use the word 3-fold or 2-fold.
Well, it does, but it does say mental and physical disease.
I'm not arguing that.
Yeah.
I'm not arguing that. I'm just saying the word.
Yeah.
That's why it's an argument with people, because it doesn't say 2 or 3. But it talks about mental and physical greater than it does anything.
No, but it talks about mental and physical as a disease.
As a disease.
Yes, it does. Absolutely does that.
Don't get
Yeah.
caught up in the word.
Yeah.
That's the
No, the twofold is my language to say, is to describe the disease. I have disease of mind and body.
Yeah.
That's what the book says. That's what the literature defines it to be. Okay, two more questions. Go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to ask if she has some last words since the meeting. It's now just 5 minutes or
Yeah.
something. Yeah.
Okay. Anybody else got a question? Are we all out of questions? I'll do like the auction guy last night. Questions going once. Okay.
So, thank you. When I go through the book with my sponsor, she kind of asked me to highlight certain areas and says, like, write principle. And sometimes I ask her, what's the principle? And sometimes she doesn't know, so I don't know. So in relation to the book and the steps, what are the principles that are coming out of those? You know, it talks about this on the 12 steps.
I don't want to get too controversial on you.
Right. Thank you.
Because in Cocaine Anonymous has endorsed 12 principles, but that is nowhere to be found in the AA literature. If you look in your forward to the 12 and 12, if anybody has the 12 and 12 with them, the forward to the 12 and 12, the second paragraph says that the steps are a set of principles that if practiced as a way of life can make the person usefully and purposefully whole. So according to AA, the principles are the 12 steps. There is no hope, faith, courage, humility, this and that. There is none of that in AA. And I'll give you some history. The reason we have it in Cocaine Anonymous was because very early on, we needed to raise some money. And we thought if we made a medallion and put principles on them, we could raise some money. And since then, CA World Service has adopted the 12 principles. So Cocaine Anonymous does have 12 principles, but that's not from AA. AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, does not have a principle for a step. In fact, if you called World Service in AA in New York, they would tell you that they think that's a bad idea. Because what happens from that is, if you tell somebody that courage is the principle behind the 4th step, and they do the 4th step and they're not feeling any courage, they think they haven't done the step right. We get a lot of principles as we stay sober and practice the steps, but not to, you'll get this principle with that step and this principle. According to AA, the principles are the 12 steps. According to Cocaine Anonymous, we have a medallion that says we have 12 principles. So, one last question. Anybody else? Come on.
Hi. I know it's fake it till you make it, but I have like struggles with my morning prayers, and I always think like, okay, am I asking the right things, or am I saying the right things that will help me get through the day, and not to like follow my old patterns. And so I'm now at steps 6 and 7. So I'm really writing my prayers from things that happened in the past. But do you have like, how do you say that, tips to write your morning prayers good? Or
So you're on step 6 and 7.
Yeah.
And you're asking me about step 11.
Well, I have a sponsor, and her suggestion was to pray in the morning.
Right.
And that was from step 4 and 5 and 6. We made a prayer that's more specific than just the prayer we do at the end of the meeting.
Yeah. So, but again, and see if you can see, you're on step 6 and 7, but you're worried about step 11. So, yes, your sponsor told you to pray. So just be real simple with God, like, hey, God, just checking in. Help me today. because I'm not on this step yet to really work with you on this, but, so I'm just checking in, hey, everything's cool. And then worry about the step that you're on, and keep moving towards the 11th step. But all I do when I pray in the morning is I acknowledge the fact that of and by myself, my life can be very unmanageable, and I need God's help. And I ask for awareness of what my defect is that I'm trying to work on, and that's all I do. That's all I do in the mornings, and it works out pretty good for me. So awareness is big. I incorporate 6 and 7 in my 11th step, and I just be quiet in the morning for a couple of minutes, and that's it. That's all I do. So yeah, just keep trying. You're at the point you knew, so just keep trying stuff, and you'll get to a point that something really makes you feel good. So all right, guys, thanks for letting me talk with you this morning. I appreciate it.
So let's see. Okay, everyone. This is the end of the meeting. If you have any additional questions or comments, please speak with Danny or someone with a blue badge after the closing. Then I have asked Marianne to read a vision for you.
My name is Mariana. I'm an addict. A vision for you. Our book is meant to be suggestive only. We realize we know only a little. God will constantly disclose more to you and to us. Ask Him in your morning meditation what you can do each day for the man who is still sick. The answers will come if your own house is in order. But obviously, you cannot transmit something you haven't got. See to it that your relationship with Him is right, and great events will come to pass for you and countless others. This is the great fact for us. Abandon yourself to God as you understand God. Admit your faults to Him and to your fellows. Clear away the wreckage of your past.